So what we're going to do today is talk a bit about the framework of this relationship-based fundraising and look at sort of the different stages of that process and how they look, so what they are to begin with and how they look like in digital, and then open up the floor for question and answers.
So the relationship-based fundraising approach, we created the relationship-based fundraising field guide back in 2020 alongside Ford Foundation. And it was just trying to basically create this accessible free resource, which you can download now, just to help fundraisers start to kind of systemize and structure their donor journey. So if you go to the next slide, please. What we came up with, and we kind of co-created this alongside, I think it was something like 25 different organisations from around the world, I believe, that's correct, yeah. So 25 different organisations of all different sizes, all different kind of thematic areas, making sure that we're representing those small NGOs that might exist in the Global South, for example, working with them to really understand, like, okay, what is this relationship-based approach and how can we kind of structure it to help give people a really useful framework to go back to your own organisation, map out against the 6 main stages which we'll go through today. And it gives you a really accessible kind of activities to do to start thinking about where do you have weaknesses and areas of growth, which we'll go through today. And start to think about, okay, identifying your new donor, what is the journey that they would go on in your organisation. So the overall aim obviously is to strengthen your fundraising, create more sustainable income sources from a diverse pool of donors. So starting off with identification, this is the first stage. So, and just to go back to the 6 different stages, you would do the identification and the motivations, and then once you have brought on board your donors, you would then go through the final 4 stages and just keep on repeating that. So it's a really clear kind of framework. So the identification is just actually determining your donor audience. So thinking about who are your current donors, who are you working with, what kind of donor audience are they? So are they trusts and foundations? Are they corporates? Are they high net worth individuals? And starting to really map them out. So like, have you got a CRM, a customer relationship management system? And also just looking at what are the right prospects for you. So what kind of donor audience areas do you want to start looking at? I just actually spoke to a charity just now who their whole donor portfolio is trusts and foundations, and they haven't even started looking at kind of corporates or high net worth individuals. So they're now thinking, okay, that's an area that we need to start exploring. So then you start to think about, okay, well, how do we actually reach them? And you look at your networks, your existing networks, who is on your board, who's in your team, what events are they going to, and start thinking about, like, okay, how are we going to map out how to reach those people? So yeah, really kind of systematizing the way that you're doing that.
Yeah. And how you do that in digital is not very different from how you do this offline. So the first thing that we want to think about is this overlap between the audiences that we have and the audiences that we want. All charities, all organizations have 2 main groups of audiences, what comes and engages with us, and actually the people that we want to come and engage with us and use our products. So one of the first things that we need to do is identify who these different audiences are on each group and how they overlap. The broader that this overlap is, the more that our digital assets can do for us, and the narrower that it is, they have to work harder and harder because we have a more limited group of people that we can appeal to, or that we are actually appealing to. When we look at the wanted audiences, these are usually the easiest to identify of all of them, because you sort of inquire internally about who the organization wants to reach out to. But it's very important to bear in mind that when you do that, you will discover that there might be some misalignment between departments in who they aim to reach to, who they aim to inspire, engage, get the support of. And is not as clear cut as sort of looking at your strategic goals and say, yes, we want to have this person, like this type of audience. Normally what we do in these cases is look at qualitative research within the organization. So doing one-to-one interviews with specific key stakeholders, doing sort of open-ended surveys where we have anonymous feedback of who the audience should be, or who we want to appeal and why, and what we want them to do. And oftentimes these happens to be something that organizations want to take on themselves. They want to sort of carry out internally as an internal exercise. And obviously I'm going to say this is a very bad idea because not because I want to gatekeep research, or I want to say like, oh, you need to be this like super experienced professional to be able to do that, but because there's so many moving parts, things like conscious and unconscious bias, unconscious leading of questions and answers, broad scope versus narrow scope, in-depth versus shallow exploration, things like problem solution dichotomies, when sort of you interrogate people and instead of getting the problems out of them, you get potential solutions that may or may not apply to the problems that you're having. And also, very importantly, when somebody is interviewing somebody else, if they have the feeling that their feedback may get to their managers or get to people in the organization that they're not as comfortable with it getting to, you have more guarded responses, you have sort of less genuine insights and input into sort of what you can discover. So for any organization really, including if we did research for ourselves, an external party can be really beneficial to kind of be that neutral agent to get all of these insights and sort of genuine answers to the questions that you're asking. When you're looking at the audiences that you're having, that's a little bit trickier still, because you're trying to understand who is it that you're engaging with without seeing them. So how do you do that? One part of it is looking at, again, qualitative research, so interviews, open-ended surveys, these kind of things, but also looking at the quantitative data that you have, so the data you have in numbers that a lot of the times is sort of scattered throughout the organizations in multiple systems and collection points, and it's very difficult to make sense of. One of the things that I usually say when you're working in this identification stage is every organization has a lot more data than they think they do, because it's so scattered. A lot of the times you don't have that CRM that Harry was talking about, or you don't have sort of owners of different systems. It seems like you don't really know who your audiences are or what behaviors they have when interacting with you. But actually, if you have a systematic sort of approach to gathering that information and somebody who knows how to make sense of it and analyze it, then you can start to see a lot of patterns emerging, and you can start to identify who is it that is already interacting with us. And we're gonna move to motivation.
Yeah, motivation. I feel like that seamlessly connects to motivation in terms of asking questions and starting to actually research the why. So this is looking at understanding why your current donors are actually giving to your organisation. So I think it's really important to do that at this stage, to understand why do people give, and then therefore you can use that to leverage new donors. And also design the next stages, which is around cultivation and solicitation. And yeah, so I think moving on to your...
Yeah. So like you were saying, there's probably as many motivations are out there for people to donate or to support as there are people willing to do that. So it's about identifying for your specific audiences, the ones that you have and the ones that you want to have, what is that deep personal reason or that circumstance or that belief in their belief system that drives them to interact, to support, to donate. And what is the overlap between that sort of personal link with your cause and the cause itself? The same way that we were saying there's an overlap between the audiences that we want and the audiences that we have, there's an overlap between individuals and their motivations and sort of the wider group. So what you want to do at this stage, once you've identified certain patterns in there, is kind of group these audiences into sort of subgroups driven by the motivation. This is extremely tricky a lot of the times because, again, multitude of motivations. But one of the things that I want to kind of communicate today is a bit of a checklist of things that you should consider when doing this exercise. So the first off would be to understand that anecdotal knowledge is valuable. There's some pitfalls that you need to be aware, some limitations that you need to be aware, but Any organization has people in their midst that day-to-day or in a very regular basis have direct interactions with audiences. So people from fundraising teams, people from service teams, people from sort of other areas of the organization that interact with users on a daily basis or very regularly. You need to be aware that these data or these insights will be quite biased because they're not based on sort of factual collection, but on recollection of interactions and conversations. But they're a very good source of historical knowledge and knowledge to kind of start to drive some of the inquiries and start to plan what you want to know, formulate hypotheses and things like that. So where you may have the tendency, or you may know somebody who has a tendency to say, oh, we know that audience X comes to the website very often, you want to look at that and kind of reformulate it with something like, we think we attract this type of audience with some regularity in numbers, let's prove it. And how you prove it sort of is the second point of this checklist, looking at desk research as a framework to kind of scope or define the scope of what you want to do. So at the same time that you're wondering these, or shortly after, other people have been wondering the same, other people are doing similar exercises. So you can look at a lot of public research that goes on that kind of gives you insights on what's happening in the world in that specific area or that specific industry at any one time. So things like reports, mass surveys, things like white papers even that you can find from governmental agencies, public sector, other peers in the sector, but also things like YouGov, where they do this kind of exercise on a regular basis. You can get quite a lot of sort of baseline information, background information to kind of inform your research. The main things to bear in mind is knowing who conducted the research and why. That's the motivation behind it for them as well, is very important to the results. Parameters, sample size, demographics of the sample, make sure that demographic sort of samples are diverse, are inclusive. Otherwise, you are aware that the data may be skewed in certain direction. And when the research was conducted. So obviously, if some research was carried out the day before lockdown, after lockdown, the world has substantially changed. So you have to question the validity of that research. We look at sort of 1 year, stretch 2 years of validity of research at the moment. Again, something done the week before the announcement of ChatGPT. You need to kind of factor these things in mind. It doesn't mean that you have to throw it in the bin. It just means you need to be aware of that. And also you need to be aware that this creates a framework for you to then create your own research plan to research onto your specific users. You can't just take it as gospel that it applies to all users of that type. The third point of the checklist would be using quantitative and behavioral data to help you narrow down the scope. Scope is super important in research because you could be researching for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years and not get to the end of it. So you need to really narrow down the scope of what is the question, what is the problem statement that you want to resolve with that piece of research. And looking at qualitative data is really important, and looking at attitudes and things that people say is really important. But one of the things that helps you narrow the scope is looking at this data that you have in numbers that shows you patterns of behavior. So you can then look at the questions that you're asking and making sure that they're the right questions. The things that you need to bear in mind with quantitative data is data integrity, first and foremost, making sure that your data is not skewed by something that you're not seeing or something that is in place that creates inflated or deflated numbers, things that are not sort of realistic outputs of what's happening. And again, validity of that data. If we look at patterns of how people interacted with Amazon 6 years ago, probably not the same. And we want to also be looking at behavioral data more so than demographic data. Demographics give us a good insight as to how diverse our sample is, but you can't draw conclusions from demographic data. Not all baby boomer people shop at Waitrose, for example. The fourth and sort of last point of the checklist really is qualitative data needs to underpin everything. there's really no comparison of the level of depth and richness of insights that you get from qualitative data into sort of any other kind of data. No data on their own, or no kind of research on their own tells you the full picture. So you need as much variety as possible. But if you only use quantitative data, oftentimes what you do is have the right data points and get to the wrong conclusions. So qualitative data really helps you make sure that you're going in the right direction, that you're analyzing things in the right order and getting the right conclusions. And a lot of researchers you will hear say, oh, I get more from interviewing 5 people than surveying 500 or looking at 5,000 analytics data points. And it's a bit of an exaggeration, but it goes to say that the richness and the depth that you get from qualitative data and the opportunity to ask, why do you think that, or why are you doing this, get you so much further than trying to formulate hypotheses in your head. And that takes us to the next stage.
Actually, before we go to the next one, I'm just thinking as well how that relates to our field guide as well. And I'm just thinking about anecdotal knowledge. Everyone kind of talks about different types of donors and how they have certain characteristics. And then you have like desk-based research, which you can Google, okay, well, what do trusts and foundations like, and find out quite a lot of information with that. But really having conversations, I think, are the most powerful things that you can do. So I think just asking your donors, like, why do you give, having a space where they can be really honest with you, and just learning from them to really start to build your understanding of what to take through to the next stage and how to kind of structure your communications with your donors. So I think one thing to take away is just bring your donors into your journey. It's the donor journey, but bring them into the journey. So cultivation, stage 3. And this is just around, so you now have identified the donors, you know kind of what category they fall into and what characteristics that donor will have. You know the motivations that the reason why they're wanting to donate. And this is around the pre-making the ask stage. So, okay, what can you do to keep them really engaged? It's normally about 12 to 16, well, there's no specific timeline on this, but normally like a 12 to 16 month sort of period where you're like meeting them for maybe in-person coffees if possible, or virtual coffees. Are you inviting the long tenure events that you're doing? Are you writing any reports? Like, how are you really engaging those donors who haven't quite given to you yet, but are on that journey? Or say they have already given to you and they're coming back round they've already given you like a small short-term grant. You're now looking for that next big thing, that next multi-year grant. How are you doing that? How are you keeping them engaged? So it's really starting to be creative with your fundraising techniques.
And how you sort of identify what kind of journeys happen on the site, like how that translate into a digital platform is looking at the user journeys from a digital perspective. So journeys and mapping journeys allows you to have an overview and a visualization of every point of contact of that user with your digital presence, whether it be social media or the website or a campaign page or whatever that might look like. And when we're looking at user journeys, we're looking at sort of 3 main things: decision paths, progressive disclosure, and iteration. With decision paths, what we're wanting to identify is what takes users from decision A to decision B or C or D, sort of along the lines. So decision A, imagine somebody decides to click on a Google ad and come to the site, towards all the way to decision C, where they decide to donate or to contact or to support you in some way. Usually what we want to do is, on one hand, identify sort of what makes them follow specific decisions along the journey, but also what kind of decisions are ideal for the organization that users follow. And again, see how these overlap and see what opportunities you have to, at that point, present something that sort of prompts the user or nudges the user onto a specific decision or making that decision, which is part of progressive disclosure, which is essentially giving the user the information that they need at the time that they need it. Anything that you present to the user at a time when they're not ready is noise, and it becomes part of incrementing their cognitive load. And cognitive load, just kind of very quickly, is the sort of processing power that your brain has to do for you to perform a task. The more cognitive load that you require from a user, the more likely they'll abandon the journey, the more likely that they'll drop off without finalizing it. With the sort of growth of algorithms and personalization of information online, that expectation that you will be presented with the right information at the right time has only increased. You may hear it called the For You page effect, for those of you who like Twitter, TikTok, the other one, the one with the young people. So people are more and more accustomed that you will just open a feed and everything in there will respond to the way that you sort of train the algorithm to show you things that are relevant to you based on your previous interactions, based on your preferences and things that you've done in the past. And that sort of encroaches in that continuous iteration of pages and campaigns and interactions with the user. You're never gonna get it right on the first time or second or third. It's about these sort of niggly bits of improving things progressively, and very, very importantly, making sure that you understand and you know what is it that made the improvement, as opposed to gonna just change a bunch of things and see what sticks and you don't really know what happened, because that continuous iteration is what's gonna make that page or that interaction so much more successful, which not only impacts on how the user interacts with you in that moment, but also their overall experience with you and their likelihood of coming back for more later on. And the way to sort of look at interaction and constant iteration is that users needs change really, really fast. The more that you use to these things, the easier it is for you to adapt to these changing needs in an ongoing basis. And that sort of kind of takes us very nicely onto how we ask users to do things for us.
Yeah, I think and just going on from that, it's just really about understanding your donor. And rather than looking at them just as a donor, it's looking at them as a person. Because at the end of the day, people give to people. So the solicitation bit is the making the ask, which it can be quite intimidating. Do we have many fundraisers here today? Yeah. Who likes making the ask? No. Oh yeah, there's always one. So yeah, making the ask can be quite intimidating. And I think when you have been through quite a structured process, when you've done the cultivating, you've met them, you know that they're really they're wanting to support your organisation or make a bigger gift, you will know intuitively when to do it. So I think often as well, people don't know when to do it. So it's a matter of actually asking them, I'm starting to think about a potential partnership with you, framing it more as a partnership rather than just like asking for money and it being really transactional. So yeah, the solicitation part is all about the right time, framing and reaction. So if they do reject you, how are you going to take that? Well, you're just going to ask for some feedback, look at ways of keeping them cultivated. You've obviously slightly missed the mark on like their motivation. So maybe asking them some more questions around it and just building up that institutional knowledge of that specific donor as well to be able to use it and adapt your approach.
Yeah, and that's really worthwhile doing, especially sort of on face-to-face or personal interactions with a donor or a supporter. But what happens when you cannot do that because you have that ask somewhere on the website, or hopefully many places on the website, and you don't see the reaction and you don't have any information or any feedback as to how it goes. So that's where qualitative research really plays a part, because you're able to sort of look at how people interact with different things, but also understand what are the peculiarities of specific types of audiences. In research that we've done in the past sort of year and a half, we found that a lot of sort of high net worth individuals that donate, a lot of people who are engaged in philanthropy are usually time poor. They do really good due diligence, so they're very diligent with checking that the organization is solid, that it's worthwhile supporting, etc. And they also value personal connections, which again kind of gives you that contradiction of I love personal connections, but I don't have time for them. So when you're kind of faced with these types of audiences, you may want to ask things like, am I present, or is my organization present in platforms that they're likely to see? With these kinds of audiences, oftentimes we find that they're very unlikely to come across your organization on a Google ad, but perhaps a Financial Times ad is a bit more adequate and they're more likely to kind of find you there. How easy it is for them to find that due diligence information. So your annual reports, who's your board of trustees, who's your sort of major stakeholders, your partners, things like that. Is that information in a place? Do they have like a place that you can signpost them to, and from there they can go to all of this information? Or are you making them work really hard to get, that PDF downloaded on their phone and have to like pinch it up and just zoom it in to, read 100 pages of an annual report? Or can you give them the highlights on a page and just make them do a bit less effort? You may want to know things like, are the contact people easy to reach? Are the contact details on the site in a place that's unequivocal for them to say, oh, that's the person and that's how I reach them, as opposed to, here's a list of people, choose your pick, try your luck with any of them. We're not going to give you any context as to who does what and why to contact them. Or actually you give them a steer and you also manage their expectations as to, if you email somebody, we're going to get back to you in 2 working days, that kind of thing. So how easy do you make your the life of your audience at the end of the day? If you're looking at sort of more mainstream audiences, so not high net worth individuals or CEOs of companies, you look at perhaps sort of general public, inverted commas, with some disposable income, you want to be looking at sort of more removed interactions with the website, but things that can also be tracked. And here's where quantitative really gives you a very good outlook of what's going on. Things like how they interact with specific buttons on specific pages, specific campaigns, specific checkout processes, where they drop, where they don't drop, all that kind of stuff. One thing doesn't exclude the other. As I said, every type of audience is sort of, it has a part of uniqueness to your organization and the way that they relate to your organization. So you may have a high net worth individual or a CEO type of audience that actually loves to be to donate on the website on a mobile checkout process. You need to sort of identify and understand how is the best way that you can relate to them and they can interact with you in turn as well. And that's, again, I'm sort of banging this drum nonstop, but like how you want to always be iterating and always be adapting to what is it that your particular audience wants and needs from you on your digital platforms, website or otherwise. And here's when one of the most useful sort of quantitative methods of investigation and interrogation comes in place, which is A/B testing. Essentially showing somebody 2 versions of the same thing to see which one, not somebody, a bunch of somebodies, but to see which one is more successful. And here is sort of what I anticipated before, where you have to be really, really careful to sort of change one specific item at a time and give it enough time and have statistically significant input to be able to get to the right conclusions. But A/B testing can take many forms. You have sort of the classical of presenting 2 different things, or you have sort of a bit more convoluted stuff that actually yields really good results, which is preference testing, showing 2 images out of the blue. None of them sort of surrounded with any more context, but asking your audiences to choose one, and then you can sort of draw conclusions about predilection. There's a really cool exercise done by Netflix where they spent, I don't know how many millions, a lot of millions. They spent 10 months to identify which thumbnail at the top of their banner drove the most signups to their platform. And that was a huge margin for them. And they did that with prototypes and 10 users to sort of test which one did better for them with A/B and multivariate testing, but only changing sort of that one thumbnail at a time. Is a very, very good example of that kind of thing. Cool. So once they've donated, how do you keep interacting with them?
Well, you say thank you to answer that. And also, your donors by this stage, how they want to be thanked as well. Some people just like to be anonymous. Some people want to be shared on the website, put up on a wall somewhere. Really understand your donors, what their motivations. Are they a high net worth individual who doesn't want anyone to know they've got all this wealth? In which case you'd be really discreet about it. It's just really understanding the donor. So I think just determining whether it's appropriate or not, and also how do you just send them a thank you letter, how that's done as well. So how does that apply to the website?
Yeah, so you essentially need that deep understanding of who your audiences are and what they want from you. And you're not always going to get it right. Actually, you're never going to get it right for every single person. But what you want to do is sort of interact in the ways that most of that type of audience want you to interact with them. And also, to get it right for more people, give users control of how interactions happen. These sort of, again, really clever algorithms make it seem really easy, but it looks that easy because it's very complex and also very costly. So how do you, as a charity, as a third sector organization that don't have these gigantic budgets like the Netflix one that I was talking about, how do you go about making sure that users have some control of how they want to interact with you without having to ask them, so how do you want me to thank you? So you look at user stories and, again, user journeys. So we've talked about user journeys before, but user stories are sort of informal narratives that tell you how a feature provides value to your users, and that guides you. You get that usefulness to guide you as to how that feature needs to be developed, or how that interaction or that function needs to be developed on your digital platform, instead of looking at what others are doing, what's happening out there. Because at the end of the day, your user doesn't care that that other website they've never seen in their life has this like really cool thing that like jiggles and says thank you once they've done a donation. That, like, they really don't care. What they care is that whatever sort of point of interaction that you're presenting them with has value for them personally. User stories have this format that's very standard. That's something like, as a user type, I want to perform this task so I can achieve this goal. And when you look at sort of acknowledgement, you can formulate these in ways that kind of relate to the users based on what you know of them. So some examples could be, as a high net worth individual who values privacy, I want to receive a private and personal acknowledgement of my donation so I can support organization without the pressure of public scrutiny. That's very clear as to sort of how you need to develop that going from there. It gives you all the sort of points, all the touch points and all the needs that user has. So then you can develop, for example, the personal messages that sort of happen offline. Or you could have something like, as a CEO of a large company, I want to be listed as a supporter in the organization's website so I can demonstrate my company's ethical contribution to my customers. Again, it gives you sort of paywall and, logo wall and corporate partners section and that kind of thing. So once you have those stories, you can look again at your user journeys and look at how you kind of apply three very important principles to them. So how you prioritize impact and value for the user, how you optimize the experience that each user type has and that you've identified with the stories, and how you incorporate the user feedback throughout. So again, you're never going to get it right the first time, and even if you do, things will change and then that's not right anymore. So again, looking at these user stories and user journeys as tools that you need to keep maintaining and you need to keep using. It's not something that you do once and then check it out the window. It's something that should help you create content, that should help you make pages better, that should help you make better social media posts, reach out to your audience in better ways. And that's something that's continuously evolving because their needs are continuously evolving. Once you've acknowledged and thanked them for their support and their donations, the journey doesn't stop there.
Oh, no, it doesn't. So stewardship, I feel like at this stage, it often gets missed. And it's probably the most important stage. So especially when you've had that first time donation from a donor, it's a small amount and you think, oh, well, that wasn't great. It's not really worth our time. But actually, often that's a kind of a tester grant, a tester gift. So you need to make sure that you're really managing the relationship with your donors after that point. And it's understanding how have they engaged with the cultivation part as well, have they come along to our events, how do they like to be communicated with, and making sure you have a really tailored plan for that specific audience, which will differ depending on the type of donor it is, whether it's like a trust and foundation, high net worth individual, etc. So it's often overlooked, really important to nourish that relationship. As we said, people give to people at the end of the day. So you need to make sure that that donor, that person who works in the organisation, they know their touch point with your organisation. They get an email every now and then with like an update of what you're up to. Do you have like an impact report or your annual report you can share with them? Often with, for example, corporates, they love impact metrics. So it's, are you sharing your impact measurements with them? And yeah, just making sure that you're keeping up with the stewardship to make sure that they can then go back round to the cultivation. So it is that donor journey, they're going back round, and then hopefully next time they'll give you an even larger unrestricted gift and you'll be absolutely fine.
Exactly. So we often say that stewardship is sort of the poor cousin of donations, because everybody acknowledges that you have to say thank you after a donation or somebody supports you, but then that stops there a lot of the times, and it doesn't have to. That person who's supported you or has donated to you or interacted with you in some way has done that for a reason, and because they have a link to the cause, and that doesn't go away overnight. So the most strategic action that you can take is to nourish that relationship and keep it going. And here, what I want to talk about essentially is segmentation and recapture. So looking at user segmentation, usually a marketing thing, not a research thing or a user experience thing, but it's really important to, now that you've done all that work to identify the users, identify their motivations, capture them, do an ask, have that ask actioned upon, acknowledge the donations, then you can create lists and databases and sort of repositories of these people that you already have a relationship with and that can be checked upon further down the line. And also, what are their preferences in terms of getting back in touch? What is the frequency that they want to be contacted in? What are their interests that you can sort of communicate with them? Is it that they want to know what you're up to, what you've done during the last year, or do they want to know about new appeals and things that need your urgent support? The better that you have that, and obviously GDPR and contact preferences and all that kind of stuff, but once you have that in the bag, then you need to use these lists. And the more that you optimize these lists, the more that you sort of have the right balance between good segments and sort of not a lot of noise, but also not just let me email everyone, the better these communications can fare for you. And then in terms of user recapture, it's about reminding users that have interacted with you in the past that you're still there and that you still need their support. And that can be done via email marketing, for example, events, or it can also be done with Google Ads and pay-per-click on search engines and social media. There's a lot of time and effort and capacity that you need to put into something like Google pay-per-click, but there's also a lot of grants that they give to NGOs and third sector organizations. And the only thing that you need most of the time is to have a good strategy behind how you use these sort of free money, essentially, that they put to you, and how you kind of work around the limitations that they put into this free money, because nothing is free really, to kind of get the most out of it. If you can manage that strategy and then manage sort of monitor the performance, focus your efforts where they give you the most yield, then all of that becomes really profitable and sort of really hardworking for your digital assets and sort of drives traffic. And again, reminds people who are already interested in a topic that your organization works for or a concept that is linked to your brand that you're still there and that you still need their support. So to wrap it up, I'm gonna sort of talk about these two examples of how all this framework kind of applies to the work that we've done with Human Dignity Trust and Centerpoint. So Human Dignity Trust, we started working with them to move them from sort of an old website and an old brand to a new brand, a new website. And what they had at the point that we started working together was that they had a lot of traffic that would go to the website and go away. in a matter of seconds. And so we had to identify why that happened. And one of the first things was kind of identifying that overlap between who we want to appeal to and who is coming to visit us. And the circles were almost not touching. They were touching a little bit. But most of these people who would come in mass and then leave were people who were not really interested in them as a charity or the work that they do, were people looking for the definition of dignity. So we worked a lot with them, doing a lot of stakeholder workshops, really nailing down what kind of audiences you want to attract, to then do the work to kind of move away from this massive traffic of unwanted audiences into getting them a lower amount of traffic, but of good quality traffic that would go in and increase donations and increase newsletter subscriptions. And for them, the newsletter was really a great asset to keep that stewardship and that relationship going. Their donors are mostly, and the main audiences are mostly high net worth individuals, trusts, foundations, that kind of thing. And they did sort of, as a result of the new website, were able to sort of present to them the information that they needed. Centerpoint, on the other hand, most of their target audiences would be, although they do have corporate partners and so on, would be general public with a degree of disposable income that are very motivated for the cause. And what we did with them was a lot of end user research to identify needs, motivations, pain points, and make their journeys a lot more efficient and sort of look at the opportunities to increase conversion for all these journeys. But one of the things that I want to sort of make emphasis on is that their optimized donation journey is tracked, like every single point of it almost is tracked, so we can understand where users may struggle and where we need to put more qualitative insights into to identify what is it that's not working at this point. So we use qualitative data to focus the next research that we are doing, and also sort of their keenness on doing ongoing research for new services that they want to provide to users, not just having a bunch of people internally in a room being like, I reckon an artificial intelligence chat would be good for people. Yeah, sure. Actually going and seeing how people feel about it, what their concerns are, what would they use it for, not use it for, what kind of shape it needs to happen. What are their issues with sort of in the sense of service users, for example, what would be their issues with connectivity, devices, all that kind of thing. And the same thing applies for their donors as well. Obviously, we want to understand if they face any issues with the devices that they use, the connectivity, the amounts, cost of living crisis, like all that kind of thing. All of this is research that can feed back into things as little as the amounts that we suggest, or as big as how we come back to these users and ask them to support us again. And yeah, that'd be it.
Amazing. Thank you everyone for listening.